Hello and welcome back to our live coverage of the United Nations Climate Talks here in Cancun, Mexico. I'll remind you that we are coming to you live, so it's an interactive show and you can send questions and comments in. You can do that either via the chat box below the video window where you're watching, or if you use Twitter, then use the hashtag #OneClimate and we will monitor your questions and comments and either respond to them or put them to our guests throughout the show. Delighted to welcome Heather Allen of Bridging the Gap, and I shall begin by asking you to explain what Bridging the Gap is.
Thanks. Yes. Hello, Adam. Bridging the Gap is an international partnership which has been brought together in the last 3 years to look at how to bridge the gap between transport and climate and bring the two communities closer together. As I mentioned, it's an international partnership, a voluntary commitment by 5 different agencies, of which I represent the public transport sector from the International Association of Public Transport. You probably never even imagined there was such a thing, but we've been going for more than 100 years. Veolia Transport, that's the private sector, they're also one of our members, and Transport Research Laboratory, a scientific research institute in the United Kingdom, GTZ, which is the German International Technical Cooperation Agency, and ITDP, which is the Institute of Transportation and Development Policy. It's a little bit difficult to remember that.
And so what are these organisations trying to achieve together?
Okay, well, transport is a big issue in climate change, and even Yubru last year mentioned that if we don't really fully address transport and buildings, then we're not going to make any big progress in climate change and in the reduction of emissions. So it is a huge piece of this puzzle, and what we're really concerned about is that under the Kyoto Protocol, transport really wasn't on the agenda, and it's done extremely badly out of the financing mechanisms and the different processes that were put in place under the Kyoto Protocol. And so we're really looking forward to something in the post-2012 agreement that is going to allow transport to, on the one hand, really show what its potential is to reduce emissions, and on the other hand, to be able to benefit from some of these new streams of funding and financing, and to send the signals, particularly to the developing world, that they're going to have to do something about having more sustainable transport networks. Our particular initiative actually focuses more on land transport. So transport is always one of these very big baskets of information, like, you have aviation, you have shipping and maritime, you have freight and passenger and individual, and then you have all the rail and road, and it's a very complex sector. So we're really looking at passenger transport and land-based passenger transport.
And you hear a lot, I should just say the music behind us, we've got a directional microphone, so don't worry, they will be able to hear you. The music behind us is Fossil of the Day, and we have got a team recording that, so we'll be hopefully be able to bring that to you later. You hear a lot about transport at these talks, but it's mainly about planes and ships, isn't it? Is land transport a big contributor to CO2 emissions? Is it a big part of the problem, or is it kind of a smaller sector?
Oh, it's a very big piece of this puzzle. It's a big part of the problem. And one of the most worrying things in this is that it is one of the growing sectors. So it is really reducing the effects that other industries are making, because emissions from road transport in particular are growing. As you can imagine, places like India and China, as their economies have grown, so have their motorization. I think in somewhere like Beijing, you'll see that there are about 6,000 new registrations of cars per month. I mean, this is a huge amount, and when you think that 100 cars is about a kilometre, so you can imagine what extra congestion this is bringing to the world. And anyone who has visited Jakarta or Bangkok, they've suffered a lot. Or Nairobi. I mean, you waste so much time in congestion all over the world. So it's not just a developed and developing issue. It's really a worldwide problem that needs to be addressed.
think Jamie, who is our tech guy here, and I can vouch for the fact that in Beijing and in China, this really is a massive issue, because the last climate meeting was held in Tianjin, and the smog that came as a result of the industry and transport there was a big problem, let alone the delays. And as you say, that's an astonishing figure, 6,000 new cars a week. What's the alternatives that your alliance is looking to push forward?
Well, one of the major messages is that there has to be support, and this whole negotiation process is about how the developed world should support the developing world in not taking the same decisions as they did. Now, this in transport is really, really important. I mean, if you look at all the other sectors, then transport has got to be one of the key ones, and buildings, as I've mentioned. So really, our key message is that we are trying to give support to any of the developing world that is willing to look at a sustainable transport system, and it's not about a modal choice. People will need cars, they will use cars, but you don't necessarily always need to own your car, for example. And if you have car sharing programs mixed with very attractive and dense public transport networks at an affordable price, and this can be put in place relatively easily. You have buses now that are running on a kind of same system as a metro, so they have dedicated lanes and they whiz along past all the congestion. They're nice buses, they can be air-conditioned buses with an affordable ticket, and you get to where you want to go really quickly. And if that's also integrated with walkable communities, some decent sidewalks that are not just used for shops and restaurants and people repairing motorcycles, as it often is in Asia, and the pavement is not broken and you don't have barriers to stop you from walking. People, we've walked for many thousands of years. That's what differentiates. That's the difference between us and apes, is that we can walk. So let's use it. That's the most sustainable way of getting around, and we need to do that.
What are the benefits of this switch, though? Are there benefits beyond simply reducing CO2 emissions of kind of investing in public transport infrastructure and encouraging people to, walk or cycle?
Oh, there are a lot of benefits, and most of the benefits are maybe outside the transport sector itself, in fact. So if you have a strong public transport network, first of all, you take a lot of cars off the road. So as I've mentioned, every 100 cars, that's 1 kilometre. So if you take cars off the road, that means that you actually need less road space. It gives more space that could be used for parks, it could be used for sidewalks. This creates also better air. If you have clean technology and you have fewer vehicles, you have a better air quality. So this again has a lot of health aspects. We need, I think the WHO minimum level of physical activity is about a half-hour walk a day. Well, if you walk to and from public transport stop, you get pretty much what you need, and it can be an easy walk. It's very inclusive, so everybody has access to public transport, whether you're young, old, you're going to school, or you're going to see the doctor, or you're a mother with children, or any of these things. So this is really, it's a very clear way of getting a more inclusive society. If you have a very car-based society, then you have people sitting in cars, they're not talking to each other, they're not really aware of what's going on, they don't integrate so well into the different classes of society, and basically you are taking a very selfish approach to your own mobility if you only use the car. You use 20 square meters approximately of space for your one person, if you're one person in the car, and you're wastefully using energy, because you're usually pulling about 2 tons of steel with whatever you weigh, and you don't need to have a couple of tons of steel to move as well as what you're weighing to move. So if you sit in a bus, you're also making a gesture towards the environment.
And what kind of are we on the right tracks in terms of achieving this progress? Because I'm thinking in London, for example, where I live, we've just introduced a bike sharing scheme, and I know that some of my friends use car sharing schemes, which I hadn't kind of come across only a few years ago. So that feels like we're kind of on the right tracks. But then if I think about a lot of US cities, or if I think about Cancun here, where it doesn't feel like anything other than the car really seems like a viable mode of transport. The cities seem to be designed for cars. So is this going to be a fairly rapid transition that we can achieve, or is it going to take decades? Because once you've built these highways, presumably you're kind of tying the infrastructure in for that kind of transport for decades to come.
That's the worrying thing about this whole picture, and this is also one of the reasons why we're here, because whatever decisions and for whatever reasons the governments make those decisions now about transport infrastructure, that will lock in the behavior of their citizens for the next 30 years. So if they build freeways and highways and urban motorways, then that is what people will use, and it will only last 5 or 10 years before it becomes just one congested mass of cars. Now, what really needs to be put in place is it's a combination of measures that brings choice. People have this idea that it's either one thing or the other, but it should actually be all about choice. And if you've got a choice of different modes of transport to get to where you want to go, then that's I think the way of the future. As people live closer to centres of urban development, and it becomes more difficult to have very wide motorways, because let's face it, if you have a 6 or 7 lane motorway in front of your door, you usually have to get in your car and drive a few kilometres to go across the road, because you can't go across the road. Now, if you have just a single lane and in each direction, and a bus lane, then and maybe a cycle path and a nice wide pavement, you can easily get across the road with no great problem. So it's really about those decisions. And as you get into the centres of towns, and we all live more and more in towns and cities these days, your choices should be more towards the mass forms of transport. There should be metros, buses, light rail, tramways. All these work really, really well in cities. And as you go further out into the rural areas, then, of course, cars are the better option, because you can't provide the same sort of mass options as you get out. So it's all about choice, really.
I'll just remind our viewers, it's an interactive channel, so you can send in your comments, and we've had a comment come in. It says, I work for a non-profit physical activity initiative in Canada. One of our biggest initiatives is around using active transportation. Of course, physical activity benefits, also reduction in emissions, community engagement and economic savings. Frequently point out the benefits of choosing sustainable transport on individual health, and reducing pressure in healthcare structures by having healthier populations. So is it these kind of residual benefits that are going to allow us to sell this as a kind of a proposition in a way? Because so many people aren't really interested in climate change or doubt it, and the politics of it are so kind of divisive. Are you pushing kind of this move to public transport for the health benefits and for the kind of social and cohesive community benefits?
Well, of course, I mean, you have to tailor your message as to who you're speaking to. So from a politician's point of view, then, in fact, if you can put forward these health benefits, we often call them co-benefits, in fact, things like health benefits, things like better air quality, things that are important to them and important to local city authorities, then obviously this is the kind of message that passes very well with them. But when you're talking to the people on the street, it's important that people start understanding that they are in charge of their decisions, and if they don't lobby their politicians for better transport options, then the politicians are very, very worried that they would make the wrong decision. And they have this, I won't say it's old-fashioned, but it's this rather antiquated idea that everybody wants a car. not everybody wants a car now, and this gentleman in Canada shows that he's seen the benefits of walking. He now works for it. He's obviously very passionate about it as well, and it's great to hear, because it's the younger generation that we've got to get this message across, that the idea of the American dream, when you just jumped in your car and you went off and drove off into the sunset, is actually no longer a possibility, and the amount of times that people, buy a car and then they can't go anywhere in it because there's so much congestion around, that's the reality these days. So I think that it's really important that particularly younger generation get this idea that they've got choices.
Just before we wrap up, before the show when I was speaking to you, you said that transport hadn't really been given the prominence it deserved at these UN climate talks. Do you feel that there is the potential for this issue to move forward? Are you optimistic that in 20, 30 years' time we might be kind of seeing cities that kind of have the kind of infrastructure that you're describing, or is this one of the subjects where actually we're in a bit of a rut, or how optimistic are you?
I'm quite optimistic. I'm not very optimistic because I've been taking part in these climate change talks now for about 7 years, and I have seen a lot of progress. But what I'm on the one hand, I feel that there's a lot of great stuff going on out there in the world, in fact. But I am a little bit concerned that there is a gap between somewhere like here in Cancun, where you have the negotiators who have their national obligations to put forward and defend their own positions on that, and it doesn't seem like transport is really high up on their agendas yet. So we feel that although there's a lot going out there, unless we get some forms of streams of financing that would actually generate a low carbon transport systems to become more attractive to the countries that need to put these in place now. They have the choices now because it's very difficult to retrofit afterwards. And we just feel that at the national level and at the city level, there's still a little bit of a gap between what's going on at this higher international level. And so really we would like to see a couple of countries really adopting transport as part of their national mitigation plans, to put in processes in projects in place that would be aspirational for other countries to come together as groups and to push transport, because there is quite a lot of opportunity for that, and now has got to be the time.
Heather, thanks ever so much for joining us. It's been really interesting to speak to you.